And put the scripture reading back on for me. The scripture reading. I want to read just the last part of it again. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Does that bother you any? It does me. Now, my problem has greatly diminished since my wife died. Living alone, I don't have anybody to talk to except my little dog. And so it's easier for me to control my words if there's nobody around. However, there's a reverse side to that thing. Without anybody being around, you can be self-centered and not know it. And self-centeredness is just as bad as speaking evil words. They'll keep you out of heaven too. I've been wondering, I've been praying hard that the Lord would give me victory over my old sinful nature and help me truly to become one with Jesus. And I take seriously what what James said that we discussed last week. Remember, James said that if we can control our tongue, we can control our bodies. In fact, he even suggests that the tongue controls the body. And so if I want to become one with Jesus, as he prayed that I would become one with him, I've got to learn to control what comes out of my mouth. This week I've been wondering and thinking about what has caused me through the years to say ugly, unkind words to my wife. Now, even though I'm now single, I don't think anybody here has been married longer than I was married. Anybody been married more than 60 years? I have considerable experience of being married. One woman for 60 years. We were totally different personalities. Totally different. I don't think you can find people more different than me and my wife was. As a consequence, we operated on two different levels. She thought differently than I did. And as a consequence, we often differed. You know what I'm talking about? And I've often wondered, when I got into an argument with Grace, I suffered for it. You men know that, don't you? You get in an argument with your wife, you suffer. Well, sometimes wives suffer too, but hey, men don't have a clue how to make people suffer like a woman does. And knowing if I upset my wife, I was going to pay the penalty, I was going to suffer, why did I keep doing it? Why? What kind of a stupid person am I? I know I'm going to get in trouble. Why do I do it? Why do these words come when I don't want them to come? And so this past week I've been thinking about, well, what are those triggers? What are those things that trigger me to say dumb and stupid things? Things I should know better than to say. That I know is going to hurt her, and then in turn she's going to punish me. I have come up with 5 suggestions. And I think there's a slide there, gentlemen, with these 5 suggestions on it. Would you bring me up to date? There it is. 5 things that I suggest that triggers unkind words. And I put at the very top anger. I personally think anger is probably the number 1 trigger. And then jealousy or envy, jealousy can cause us to be catty and cruel. A third trigger, I think, would be stress. When you're stressed out, when you're just twisted up inside and you wonder, how in the world am I going to cope? You know, stress can cause you to speak unwisely. And when you're tired, I mean really, really tired. You've been pushing and pushing and pushing until you've just about to reach the end. You can say things you didn't intend to say just because you're just so tired and exhausted. And then something that I learned just before my wife died in the last few months. When you're in extreme pain, when you're hurting, if you're hurting bad enough, sometimes words come out of your mouth that are totally uncharacteristic of you. Words that you would never knowingly and willingly speak sometimes come out when you're under a lot of pain. I want to discuss these triggers with you this morning. I hope you'll find it worthwhile. Anger can cause you to do some really stupid things. We were in Birmingham, Alabama, pastoring, and we were renting a house, and the owner wanted the house back, and we had to find another house to rent. And so I went to an agency that specializes in helping you find apartments and houses. I think it cost $65 or something like that to get them to help you find a house. Well, one day my oldest son and I had gone to the agency, and we were sitting in the agency waiting room or office room there, visitor space, and we were looking over the listing of houses for rent. And while we were looking, a young man came into the building, obviously upset. And he walked up to the counter, and he told the clerk that, I've been here working with you for 2 or 3 months, and you haven't found me an apartment. I'd like to have my money back. They did offer a money back guarantee that they could find you a place to rent. And he wanted his money back. And the man behind the desk said, no, we have given you information. We've given you lots of apartments to rent. It's not our fault that you didn't find one you liked. He said, you guaranteed that you would find me an apartment that I liked, and you didn't do it. I want my money back. And they got into a fierce argument. And this young man was getting angrier and angrier. His face was getting flushed, and his eyes were dilated. He was getting mad. And finally, in frustration, he reached over and picked up one of the chairs that was sitting in the lobby, sitting in the waiting room there. He picked up that chair and he said, now you give me my money back, or this chair is going through that plate glass window. 8 by 10 plate glass window. And the man behind the desk, nope, not giving you money back. And crash! That 8 by 10 plate glass window shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The man behind the desk gave me $65 back. For $65, can you imagine what it cost for him to replace that 8 by 10 foot glass window? And beside that, there was a car parked out across the side, just right in front of the building, and some of that glass shattered and hit that car and scratched the car all up. He's going to have to repaint that car. For $65, probably going to cost him a couple of thousand. That's been a number of years ago. But anyway, he was going to have to replace that 8 by 10 glass window. I mean, they knew who he was. The police could find him if he ran, but he just stayed there. He was still there when my son and I decided it's time for us to leave. Anger probably cost him a couple of $1,000, or maybe more. I have no idea what an 8 by 10 plate glass window costs. I don't know what it costs to paint a car. But he got mad, and because he was angry, he just lost it. In Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about getting angry. And he talked about anger, and there was a big, long variety of items that fit under the term anger. I mean, wrath at one end, and at the other end, maybe just annoyance. I'm annoyed. You annoy me. And in between, there's anger. There's irritation, frustration. I can remember my wife and I, in our relationships, often she'd get angry at me, she'd get annoyed with me, she'd irritate me, and sometimes I'd get irritated at her. Because she thought like a woman, and I thought like a man, and I thought she ought to think like a man. And when you are angry, whether it's wrath or whether it's anger, whether it's hatred, whether it's annoyance or irritation or frustration, when you're feeling these different degrees of anger, sometimes you lose it. And you say cruel, hateful words to each other. And if it's not just words, sometimes it's a tone of voice. Now, the only person I have talked to anymore is my little dog, little Pomeranian. She understands some words. There's some words I can speak, and she knows instantly what I mean. But I'll tell you something, she does recognize tone of voice. She detects a change in your tone of voice just like that. And if she detects a little irritation in your voice, guess what she does? Runs and hides under the bed. Every time. Runs and hides under the bed. Gets in the middle of under the bed right in the center so I can't reach her. She understands tone of voice. And so does your spouse. So does your children. They recognize tone of voice. George Washington Carver. Anybody remember him? The Peanut Man. He is credited with saying this: I will allow no man to make me hate him. And back in his days, black people had a lot of hurtful things said to them. But he said, I will not allow any man to make me hate him. No matter what he says, no matter what he does, I will not hate him. I will not get angry. I'll not get irritated and annoyed. Folk, we can control our emotions. We can choose not to get angry. We can choose not to get frustrated or annoyed. We can learn to control our emotions. Even if we're not Christians, even if we don't have Jesus in our lives, we can exercise self-control and choose not to lose our tempers. But let's look at this text talking about Jesus, Matthew 11 and verse 29. And think about this, because all of us here this morning consider ourselves to be Christians, followers of Jesus. But listen to this. Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon me, take my yoke upon you, and learn from me." Get that? Learn from me. For I am what? Gentle. I'm gentle and lowly in heart. In other words, I'm not your superior, although he was. But as a human being, he wasn't. He was our brother. I am gentle and lowly in heart, and if you will learn to be like me, you will find rest for your souls. Your whole life will become changed. Your human relationships will drastically change. If you take seriously the words of Jesus, take me upon you. Let me become a part of your life because I am gentle. Jesus never, ever lost his temper. He was always in control of his emotions. He never said cruel and hateful words. Now, he sometimes told the Pharisees and the religious leaders of his day the truth, which was they were a bunch of snakes. But he was never unkind. He never lost his temper. He said, I'm gentle and lowly of heart. Now, folks, I don't want to be unkind, but let me ask you this question. Are you like Jesus when you are not being gentle and kind? If you're being irritated, annoyed, and you're speaking wrong words, who are you representing? Who is in control of your life? Not Jesus. So I want to stress upon you the importance of being kind and gentle, courteous, thoughtful, forgiving. Listen to these characteristics of the Christian who is controlled by the Holy Spirit. It's found in Galatians 5, verses 22, 23, and 24. Just listen. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering with your spouse, long-suffering with your children, kindness. Spirit of kindness is in your voice all the time, even when you're having to correct your children, or, do I say this? When you're trying to correct your spouse. That's not a good thing to do. That's really not. I wouldn't recommend it. That's called nagging. Anyway, if you have Christ in your life, you're going to be peace-producing. You're going to be long-suffering. Your life is going to be characterized with kindness, goodness, faithfulness. gentleness, self-control. That should characterize the life of a Christian. Even when someone is being unkind, someone is taking advantage of you, someone is being cruel to you, you're always going to be Christ-like. I remember one time over in Greenville, where I lived before coming over here, I bought a used lawnmower from a lawnmower repair agency. And I was buying a brand that I'd never had any experience with. And I think he was just one of the mechanics. He said, "This is really a good machine and it'll serve you for a long time." And he built it up, and so finally I bought it. Took it home and started mowing the lawn. It didn't last 5 minutes till it broke. I wasn't real happy. So I went back and wanted to give them that lawnmower back and get my money back. They wouldn't do it. They said that we repaired for you, but we didn't have any guarantees on this thing, and it's your problem, not ours. Well, I lost it. You know, I got unhappy, and I guess I got angry. Somewhere in that range of anger, I was somewhere in there. Anyway, I didn't speak kindly to him. I was upset. Then I went home and I realized I really didn't act like a Christian when I was arguing with that man about getting my money back on that lawnmower. Didn't even mow my lawn one time. I realized I wasn't demonstrating the character of Jesus. Now, this is not easy to do. If you don't believe me, you try it. I went back to him and apologized. That's not easy. But kind of thinking, I don't want him always thinking that this is characteristic of Seventh-day Adventist Christians. So I went back and apologized for being unkind in my words. It taught me a big lesson. Think of something Jesus said, Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12. This is sometimes referred to as the, it's gone from me, my mind's gone. Listen to this, and you'll tell me what it is. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. What is it? Golden rule. Think about it the next time you're talking to your spouse. Think about it the next time you're talking to someone who's taken advantage of you or cheated you or spoken harshly of you. No matter what anybody does to us, no matter what our spouse does, no matter what our spouse says, no matter what dumb things our children do, that does not give us an excuse to be unkind, sharp-tongued, hurtful. The Apostle Paul in Philippians 2 and verse 3 takes it a step further and becomes more penetrating, because he's dealing with what makes me angry, what ticks me off. Listen to what he says. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or selfish conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. I don't like that. Esteem others better than yourself. Don't ever speak out of conceit, selfishness. Don't put yourself before others. Put others before yourself. When I get up here preaching, I forget what time it is. Brother Robert loaned me a watch so I can look and see what time it is because there's no clock in here anymore. I'm taking a whole lot more time on anger than I should. But you got the point? Do I need to say any more? I guess I'm going to stay on anger. I got to tell you this story. I've got to. I had just moved to Sioux City, Iowa, to pastor the church in Sioux City. Now, the first thing I do when I move into a new church is visit all the elders. They're my leaders. That's where I go to get brought up to date on things. I get an idea of what's happening in the church by visiting with all the elders. Well, I visited this elder, this home. And they welcomed me in, but I felt a tenseness in the home. Maybe like I just walked into an argument. That's what I felt like. I had just interrupted an argument because they were obviously tense. Well, we visited a while, and the longer we visited, the more concerned I became because I noticed something. The husband never looked at his wife. His wife never looked at him. They didn't look at each other. And not only that, they didn't speak to each other. They'd speak to me, not to each other. So finally, I, being a pastor, took over. I said, what's going on? I sense that there's problems in the marriage, so what's happening? What's going on? And then he told me, he and his wife got into an argument 3 weeks ago. Got angry at each other, hadn't spoken to each other one single word in 3 weeks. If they absolutely had to tell the other something, they'd write it down on a note and hand them the note. But they would not speak a notable word to each other for 3 solid weeks. I mean, he's an elder of the church. What kind of a Christian is that? Well, we talked a little while, and my pastoral instinct kicked in. And finally, I said, brother, are you telling me that you haven't hugged your wife in 3 weeks? No. You're telling me you haven't kissed her in 3 weeks? No. You haven't even touched her in 3 weeks? No. Okay, I want you to stand up. We were sitting down around, I think, in the kitchen table, I think. Anyway, I said, stand up. I told her, stand up. Now I said, I want you to face each other. Look at each other. And I said, I called him by name. Do you miss it? Do you miss the hugs? Do you miss the kisses? Do you miss the touches? He was silent. Tears were in her eyes. She was crying. I said, don't you miss it? Don't you long to hold her in your arms again? Don't you long to hug her? Touch her? I gave it a moment to soak in. I said, now, brother, you are to be a spiritual leader. You are to represent Jesus. What are you going to do about it? They stood there and looked at each other for a moment, and finally he said it. He called her a name. honey, I'm sorry for being such a dumb, stupid husband. With that, she started crying and threw herself into his arms. And I left. I want to read one more verse. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 21. Man, I'm skipping. Ephesians 5, 21, 22, and 25. Paul says this, submitting to one another in the fear of God. Submit to each other. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Wives, it is not your job to make your husband better. Husbands, it's not your job to make your wives better. Your job is to love each other. That's your job. Love each other. Be kind and gentle with each other. Build each other up in love. Now, according to this watch that Robert gave me, I have preached for 30 minutes. So I'm going to quit. But 4/5 of my sermon is still out there somewhere. Grace and I were married for 60 years. There were some rough times in our lives, but we managed to get through them. Our retirement years were the happiest years of our lives, probably, for me and Grace both. I look back over those 60 years and I can see a lot of things I could have done different that would have made her happier and would have made me happier too. And probably would have made my children happier. She's gone now and I can't do anything about it. Some of you still have your spouses with you. Please learn to control your temper. Please learn to control your words. Be kind, gentle, and affectionate to one another. And do the same thing for your neighbors, your fellow employees, your employer, whoever. Be kind and gentle. Let that become your nature.